Howdy! It's almost February here in Minnesota, and between the cold and the snow, it's really easy to let cabin fever set in. So I figured it would be a good time to take a mosey down south. We'll be saddling up the Tesla for an epic road trip and taking you along on the adventure. The plan is to drive down to Fully Charged Live in Austin, Texas. It's a road trip with Joan that I'm calling a frunk full of diapers. After Fully Charged, we'll saddle up again and drive across the Gulf states to spend some time with those big-eared hombres, Mickey and Minnie. A few days in their hideout will be enough, and then we'll be fixing to move our wagon train back home. It's going to be a lot of time on the trail, but a lot of good family adventure. So we've got the big picture, but one thing needs to be figured out: the route. In all new Teslas, the navigation is built in, but ours was built before that was standard. So we've got the map and we can search for locations, but it doesn't show us the navigation route to get there. So I rely on a few other online tools. Also, some people with the navigation like to see what other sites suggest. So I thought I'd take a couple minutes today to walk you through my planning process and show you some of the resources that are out there. There are two main sites that I usually use when I'm planning a road trip of this magnitude. But I asked the Minnesota Tesla group on Facebook what their suggestions were, and they had a couple that I hadn't used before. First, Google Maps. Apparently you can search for EV charging stations and it will show nearby charging options. But it appears to be on a point-by-point basis. So you could plan a whole trip this way, but it would be very tedious. However, in an unfamiliar location, this is a handy resource. Next, and apparently the original method of EV trip planning, is through a site called EV Trip Planner. When I first tried the site, it wasn't recognizing superchargers and said my trip couldn't be done. It must have been updating or something, because the next day it worked immediately. So clicking into the route planner, you can set your departure and your destination locations. Use the plus symbol to bring up additional locations. So I'm going to go ahead and plan our whole trip through here. And one more stop to bring us home. When you first set up a profile on the site, you determine what car and what trim you have. Then I'm going to set up some of the custom options. I'm going to go a little faster than the speed limit. Set the cabin temp to 68, the outside temp to 35, roughly an average for the overall trip, and give myself a buffer charge of about 10% when getting to a charger. We'll route this through Superchargers, and pretty instantly it brings up a whole list and gives you a quick recap down on the bottom. So let's look up here at our first stops. We're going through Dow's, West Des Moines, Bethany, across from Kansas City to Topeka, and then down through Oklahoma City, Fort Worth, and down to Austin. So it looks like that's all pretty easy to do. Now, interestingly, leaving Austin, this sends us a little further north, which I find a little surprising. I would have thought it would hug the Gulf Coast a little bit more, and it gives us a yellow and a red Tesla symbols. That means it's going to be difficult to make those distances with my vehicle. But regardless, this gets us to Orlando, and then heading back from Orlando, it takes us from Chattanooga, then it heads east, which I find surprising that it routes you east and then north. I would think it would want you going pretty much a straight shot. But it takes you through Cincinnati and Indianapolis, up through Chicago, Madison, Wisconsin, and then back to Burnsville. So an interesting route, not necessarily the most straightforward route. Here we have the overall distance, driving time, charging time, energy used, etc. And this is all, of course, estimated. But it seems like a decent planning tool. I might have to play around with it a little more to get results I'm expecting. Like EV Trip Planner, PlugShare has you set up your vehicle in advance when you set up your account. My general use for PlugShare, and I use the app more often than I use the web interface, is to find locations like we did with the Google Maps, where you're in a location and you want to find nearby options for charging. So I don't generally use the trip planner, although it's a good second opinion when you're planning a trip this big. The way this works is you go down on the legend there, you can see we've got the different plug types and things we can use, and the orange chargers here are high-powered charging stations, and the green are less powerful charging stations. But you click Plan a New Trip. You can see a couple of the previous trips I've taken there. So when you plan a trip, you can add stops. So I'm going to go ahead and try to do the whole trip again, like I did with EV Trip Planner, at Orlando, and then come back to Burnsville, Minnesota. Here's a look at our overall trip, but we don't have any waypoints put in there yet, or any charging stops. So it's giving us those red bars underneath the points saying you're not going to make it. So PlugShare doesn't actually map out the chargers for you. What it does is it says, here's your route, here's what's available around it, and then lets you pick and place your stops through there. So we'll get this re-queued up here. We're up at our starting point, and this green circle is what I've put in there is, I'm going to say with highway speeds, cold weather, let's not push it past 178 miles. So within that green circle, we can see what chargers are available and select them and add them to our trip. Now, interestingly, and I didn't know this until today, is that you have to do this in order. So I should have put just 2 locations in and added the chargers between them, and then added on to that. So here we can see I'm adding West Des Moines, but I have to keep moving it back into the right path because it's thinking I want to add those charging points between my last 2 stops. So a little finicky, a little strange, but if you're only going between 2 points, that won't be an issue. Here I'm choosing one that's beyond the green circle. I don't want to go east to go west, so I'm picking this one, adding it to the trip, and again I have to slide it up. But it's still saying it's red and not going to like that, so I'm going to have to go back and change that, which I'll do here in a second. But then from those stops you can continue, and we'll fast forward through this because it's the same process over and over again. And here it doesn't give me the option because it chose the path. It's not giving me the option to stop by the Topeka Supercharger, which EV Trip Planner did, but it's going to say it's going to be hard to get from Kansas City to Wichita. So rather than giving me the option to go through Topeka, it just says, hey, you're going to have a hard time. So it's not the greatest planning tool, but like I said, it's a good backup and it's a good different view of how to do things. So this process continues through Austin. Because I'm choosing the chargers and setting the path, I can hug the Gulf Coast rather than go north like it said on EV Trip Planner. And then once I get to Orlando, I don't have to move the pinpoints to my other route. It'll just be where they've been adding between Orlando and Burnsville. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding points heading back north from Orlando. It's not going to let me use Gainesville again because I've already used it and it would remove it from my trip. So I'm going to the Ocala charger and then I'll go to the next one here looks like I'm going to be going to Lake City Supercharger. But when I add that to the trip, it gives me a warning saying I've reached the maximum number of stops. If you need to route more stops, split this into different trips. So you can see there are limits to what PlugShare can do. It can give you the entire map, or the entire route of your map, but charging every single stop in a road trip isn't going to happen. What you can do, and what I would probably do normally anyway, is break this into 3 legs. The trip to Austin, the trip from Austin to Orlando, and the trip from Orlando home. and I'm sure I could get enough stops in there, but it is a little different way of planning than rather plan your whole week. So it's a little limited. I like it as a resource, but I don't use it as my primary planning tool. Now, abetterrouteplanner.com. This is my preferred option. It's a little more intense, but it gives you a little better readout. So, like the others, I've put in my vehicle information. I try to be a little conservative on my consumption. And bump up my starting state of charge. Probably put that to 99. It has a max speed set to 93. I'm going to bump that down to 90. And let's look at some more of the settings you can choose. Outside temperature, I'm going to bump that down to 35 like I did on the other, just because that'll be an average as we're going through overnight. Add a little bit of headwind. The default extra weight on EV Route Planner was 200, so I'm going to bump this up to 200. So hide the settings there. Let's start with my position, which is Burnsville, Minnesota. I'm going to add a waypoint for Austin, Texas. Add another waypoint for Orlando. And this should give me a full round trip. So let's go ahead and plan the route. And this is not instant. It does take this probably took about a minute to figure out. But it is a long trip, so I understand. And here are our options. In order to show you the map, it takes away all of your info. So I'll try to bring that tab down again so we can see what our stops are. And like EV Route Planner, it takes us down through Iowa, down through Topeka, to Wichita, Oklahoma City, Dallas, and Austin. But unlike EV Trip Planner, it has us hug the Gulf Coast, which is what I was thinking we would do on PlugShare. It seemed to make the most sense to me. So we hug the Gulf Coast, go across to Orlando, and then from Orlando back north. And this keeps us going pretty much northwest all the way home. There's a little jog east, but for the most part, we're staying northwest. So to me, this is a pretty good natural route, probably the route I would take in a nice car. Almost 21 hours of charging, 62 hours of driving, for a total of 83 and a half hours. Here's the overall map. If you click on a charger, it gives you the options. You can avoid this charger, add this charger as a waypoint, take a long break here. So you can set some of your different options and really customize your plan and get it crystal clear. So if we look at the settings, you can see most of the time we're getting to a charger with about 10% left. So it gives us a little wiggle room, but we're going to be charging at higher speeds when we start charging at a lower state of charge. It looks like our longest charge is going to be at about an hour and 6 minutes. Most of them are going to be in the 20 to 30 minute range. I can see there's a 48 there, but there's also a 15-minute stop there. So having Joan with me in the car means that every stop we take is going to be 15 minutes at least. So when you add food and restroom breaks into that, we're probably going to be just right on time with the car. Maybe some of those longer breaks will stop and sleep. So if you zoom into the map, you can see each stop is kind of written up a little bit. A more clear view of each stop, showing the distance between each stop, how long you're going to need to stay. What I like about this is it says what percentage you need to get to. So if you arrive at a charger with more than what it thought you would get there with, you don't have to necessarily stay there the whole time. You just have to stay until your percentage hits that mark. It does show the cost or estimated cost of your charges, but for us, we get to disregard that and just charge for free the whole time. So A Better Route Planner is my stock go-to website for planning big road trips. I double check with PlugShare and sometimes use the Tesla site as well, but I find A Better Route Planner to be a little conservative but not too bad, so you get a real good sense of how your trip is going to go. And it's also kind of good to gamify it and see if you can kind of beat their suggestions a little bit. That's my personal suggestion. If you have any that you'd like to share, feel free to comment down below and let other people know what those resources are. In the meantime, I'm going to get back into the studio and out of the cold. So thanks for watching, and be sure to tune in over the next couple weeks as Jonah and I take this epic road trip with a frunk full of diapers.